Okay, so hello. Today we're presenting mental health in the criminal justice system. It's presented by me, Alexis, Rosie, and Alana. So our target population is individuals involved in the criminal justice system, which includes those in jails, prisons, parole, and on probation. And we mentioned we want to ask the question of why this matters. And pretty much we go into this because, there are a lot of criminals in this system, and we really want to emphasize the idea of like how their experience is during um, jail and prison, and then their experience outside of jail and prison, and their time for their experience with rehabilitation, excuse me. We have three sources here. There's article 1, 2, and 3. Article 1 focuses on social workers and their experience within the correctional system, and then article 2 goes into CBT and probation services, and then article 3 is the impact of prison therapeutic diversion unit on mental health and behavioral health outcomes. So article 1 was my article. It's I wanted to focus on the lesson that I learned while reviewing the source, and that was that it teaches about the role and conflicts of correctional social workers and how it affects inmates that are living with mental health challenges. And so here you can see that there are 8 areas of focus that social workers amongst the correctional system kind of focus on, and I'll go through those. So the first one is empowerment, providing inmates self-determination. The second one is membership, which allows inmates the ability to have an environment to feel safe and welcomed about their mental health. The next one is healing and wholeness, which basically means to be able to have a safe environment for growth and change and rehabilitation from their crime. And then we go into dialogue and collaboration, which is a really important one. And this basically encourages communication between inmates and correctional facility staff, because it's really important to emphasize that everyone is on the same page. Next, we go into suspicion of disbelief, where social workers must be aware and practice their awareness of their biases, so that they can have constant enforcement of empathy with these inmates. And it's important that social workers don't get caught up in judgment or diagnosis of these individuals. Then we have perspective of rehabilitation, where the correctional facilities do not prioritize rehabilitation for their inmates. And that's something that these social workers amongst this article really pointed out, was that because sort of that going back to point 4, there should be collaboration for these inmates. And unfortunately, there is a lack of correctional facilities not prioritizing rehabilitation for these individuals. The next one is inmate population and how prisons are extremely overcrowded. And then the last one, which will also go into the next slide, mentions how the framework for correctional system is just not really set up properly to assist these individuals, and that it doesn't support mental health goals. And so we kind of dive into that. So the framework of correctional and criminal justice systems, and the challenges that social workers face. So one of the first things to note is that these in prisons are extremely overwhelmed and overpopulated by not just general population, but also inmates dealing with mental health issues. I have an article that stated that over 60% of inmates are living with mental health illnesses. And so, having said that, we must address that correctional and criminal justice framework is not set up to acknowledge this rehabilitation goal for these inmates, especially those that are dealing with mental health needs. Um, and so we kind of look at that a little bit more. What I mean by that is that there's often a huge divide between, correctional facility staff and then like mental health facility staff. So for some reason, the two kind of have this weird, awkward divide where, for instance, I have a mentor who works within the correctional system in Riverside, and a lot of the correctional officers mock these holistic approaches that social workers try to work on with their inmates. And they often kind of mock them by calling them names such as like hug a thug. So the overall lesson that I gathered from this article was that how do we get this collaboration to kind of be built a little bit better? So how do these correctional facilities and overall justice systems change to become more aware of individual overall well-being, especially in terms of mental health? There we go into barriers. So the one limitation that I found from this study was that um, it was a study that came from that was based off of the South African Correctional Services Department. So it's a study that was located in South Africa. With that said, all of the findings are applicable to the studies and research found amongst the U.S. correctional system. The two are almost identical. Um, then we go into article number 2, which will be presented by Alana.
Yeah, so this next article was focusing on a specific CBT program for parolees who are considered more high risk. The program's called Choosing to Think, Thinking to Choose. It's definitely more specific and catered towards people who have been involved in the criminal justice system and that transition back into the community. So this is a 14 session program. It focuses on the automatic thoughts that individuals have and their emotional responses to stimuli. And it's very specific to criminal behavior and social skills. And so some of the topics that they go over in group include anger management, dealing with stressful situations, management of the criminal justice and community correctional interactions, and then management of interpersonal and professional relationships. So really just trying to address the specific thoughts that lead to behaviors that have previously gotten these individuals caught up with the law in the past. One of the main things that was difficult for the researchers and the people presenting this program was the actually getting people to the groups. Um, that was the biggest barrier that they ended up facing, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more later. So really briefly, we kind of know what CBT is. It's just really focusing on certain cognitive distortions that people have, the automatic thoughts in response to an action or a stimuli, and trying to address the thoughts that lead to a certain behavior, especially if it's a behavior that ended up getting someone in trouble with the law. And so you can learn more about this specific program, Choosing to Think, Thinking to Choose. If you go to Crime Solutions online, it has a whole outline of the program, different challenges they faced, and more information about it. There's also plenty of CBT trainings online since it's such a widely known and well research supported therapeutic tool. And so you can get trainings at NASW, the Beck Institute, or SAMHSA online as well. The next thing is just going to be talking about barriers for the participants. So the main thing is that treatment began about 2 months after transitioning out of prison. So part of the reason why that's bad is because people aren't getting these services in order to address behaviors and thoughts that occur to them. I think, hold on. I think we skipped ahead for a second. Okay. So the main problem with that is that they're just not being able to learn these skills as they integrate back into the community, but it's 2 months later. And so because of that, it doesn't line up with their transition. And that can be a setback for a lot of people. Another barrier in this program was that it was very rigid in its structure, and basically they would only have certain times that people could attend groups, and a lot of people couldn't come, like I mentioned before, because of either jobs or some education commitment that they previously had. And so it's not really flexible to the population that they're trying to serve. The last barrier was that group sessions were led by probation officers. And while these officers were trained in CBT for over 100 hours, and this program was created by psychologists, it still is given by people who are seen as enforcers. And I think I'm just curious how it would look different and how if it would be more effective or not if it was given by social workers, since there's more confidentiality between them and the individuals on parole. But overall, the CBT program significantly reduces the prevalence of reoffending, and it also lengthens the amount of time before someone actually does reoffend as well. So changing those automatic thoughts and perception is beneficial to people reintegrating back into the community. Um, Now we have Rosie's article.
So this article discusses, it comes from the America Journal of Preventative Medicine, and it really just goes to state that incarcerated individuals have higher levels of mental health disorders, which is only heightened by incarceration, and even more so in restrictive housing. So restrictive housing refers to solitary confinement, administrative segregation, disciplinary segregation, or supermax. And in these restrictive housing, there is limited access to programming, treatment, personal property, reading materials, TV, radio, and visitation. Um, there have been a couple of studies. So the state of Washington found that individuals who are incarcerated in restrictive housing have more symptoms of depression, anxiety, and psychiatric distress than those in general population. And really, over a span of years, North Carolina jails found that nearly half of all self-injurious behaviors did happen in restrictive housing. So what was created by the state of North Carolina were these therapeutic diversion units, which are multidisciplinary treatment units that were offered as alternative housing to something like solitary confinement. So it was staffed by behavioral health, nursing, and custody staff, and it really focused on emotional regulation, self-management skills, and an inmate's understanding of their own symptoms and patterns. The goal from these TDUs is to have an offender re-enter back into general population and ultimately back into the community. And those who were deemed eligible was based off their mental health scores and the fact that they were placed in restrictive housing. They had to voluntarily be willing to be housed in these TDUs. These units would incorporate group and individual therapy, recreational activities such as working out and TV, the concept of privileges, socialization, and then just obviously include the collaboration of staff. And so when thinking about this intervention, the strategy that we really look forward, that we focus on for this population is really thinking alternatively in regards to rehabilitation. So looking at all of these essentially like different boxes, it's bringing in staff involvement as a collaboration, but looking at like these TDUs, like looking at medical staff, behavioral and mental health along with the custody staff. It's having like an alternative perspective and even approaching group therapy in a different way. And this TDU shows that it does work because data from the years 2016 to 2019, there was a sample that was taken of about 3,500 individuals, and from that number, 463 were in a TDU. And the sample reported that those who were in a restrictive housing unit were 3 times more likely to have infractions and 3 times more likely to have self-injury incidents. So TDUs may show better outcomes in mental health, and the idea really should be to divert inmates from restrictive housing to therapeutic setting as the means of appropriate care. The limitation is really that it was based, the limitation from that study is that it was based off from the state of North Carolina, and not all of the information was recorded. Thinking about just kind of what it means to me, it's really just, I thought it was an important population to touch on because I have worked with individuals who are incarcerated. And so I think it's really just, again, thinking alternatively and changing the concept of like being more punitive and like looking at these inmates as a whole person. But I know my peers also have different ideas and thoughts.
Alana, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I just think that maybe initially I felt intimidated to do this kind of presentation because even I haven't worked in these specific settings, even though I've worked with individuals who have been in the system. But I think after doing our research and collaborating and talking more, we all felt more confident about this. I know I specifically did. And even though we're far from knowing everything, or even a lot, that we as a group will be better prepared to serve and adapt to those involved in the criminal justice system and their specific needs going forward.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up our presentation for today. Um, yeah.